mushrikeen and kuffar and munafiqeen. Ayat 8 to 10 basically is praising the Prophet as Shahid and Mubashir and Nadhir. Ayat 11 to 17 is about the obedience to the Prophet. This is in the context of some of the Muslims who had doubts about the decision of the Prophet and in Sulh Hudaybiyah. That is actually a big issue for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That if Muslims started questioning the wisdom of the Prophet, this was something very serious, and so many ayats about them. And then we looked at the two ayat, 18 and 19, last week about the Bay'atul Ridwan. And we looked at the event itself, the concept of Bay'at, and also the implication, which is sometimes used by our Sunni brothers to say that all the Sahaba basically are okay, or especially those who were in Hudaybiyah. And we looked at it, that this Bay'atul Rizwan, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it says, Radiya, He is pleased, is not a universal statement. It is not for all the time, and it's not for all of them. Especially there was a condition attached to it, which was violated within 2 years after Bay'atul Rizwan. And I presented the ayat from Surah Tawbah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about this issue that, ثُمَّ وَلَّيْتُمْ مُدْبِرِينَ, where you turned back. This is about the Battle of Hunain. And some of the brothers, raised an important question. They said, but the ayats later on talks about Allah forgiving them for having fled from the battleground. Accepted that yes, Allah forgave them, but the Ridwan which was there is gone. That doesn't really change this issue of, the Ridwan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in that event of Sulh Hudaybiyah. That has basically gone. Now they have to work again in order to gain that Ridwan and pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tonight we'll look at the series of ayats from 20 to 25. Again, as the theme of the surah says, this is connected with Surah Hudaybiyah, and Allah is again continuing to describe the benefits of this peace treaty in a way of response to the question that people had about the wisdom of the Prophet's decision. This has come before earlier, but now again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to that issue. Let us look at the first two ayats, 20 and 21 first. وَعَدَكُمُ اللَّهُ مَغَانِمَ كَثِيرًا تَأْخُذُونَهَا فَعَجَّلَ لَكُمْ هَذِهِ وَكَفَّ أَيْدِيَ النَّاسِ عَنْكُمْ وَلِتَكُونَ آيَةً لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَيَهْدِيَكُمْ صِرَاطًا مُسْتَقِيمًا وأخرى لم تقدروا عليها قد أحاط الله بها وكان الله على كل شيء قدير. These two ayats are part of that series of 20 to 25, and the literal translation would be that Allah has promised you abundant spoils, maghanim, ghanimat, the profits. It's normally used for the mal ghanimat in the battlefield. And so Allah is saying, Allah has promised you abundant spoils which you will capture in the future. تَأْخُذُونَهَا. This is in a future tense. However, فَعَجَّلَ لَكُمْ هَذِهِ. However, He has expedited this one for you. We'll talk about it. What does it mean? And has withheld people's hands from you so that it may be a sign for the believers, and so that He may guide you to a straight path. And other spoils, وَأُخْرَى لَمْ تَقْدِرُوا عَلَيْهَا, and other spoils which you have not captured, Allah has comprehended them. He knows about it in the future, what will happen to you, the benefits that you will get. In وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Allah has power over everything. Now let us look at these two ayats. Number one, وَعَدَكُمُ اللَّهُ مَغَانِمَ كَثِيرًا تَأْخُذُونَهَا فَعَجَّلَ لَكُمْ هَذِهِ. It's basically emphasizing it's continuation of what we discussed last week also. If you remember the last ayat number 19, there also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I have given you, even in future, abundant spoils that they will capture. So this is continuation from that ayat 19 going into ayat 20, that Allah has promised you that you are going to get maghanim in future. Then he says, فَعَجَّلَ. Ajjala from ta'jil, ajala. He has made it, expedited. فَعَجَّلَ لَكُمْ هَذِهِ. But there is one spoil, one ghanimat that Allah has expedited that time for you. You are soon going to get it. And that actually is in reference to Khaybar, and we'll talk about it after this. And then in the following ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this following sentences, He says, وَكَفَّ أَيْدِيَ النَّاسِ عَنْكُمْ. He withheld the hands of people from you, referring to the mushrikeen of Makkah. He prevented them from attacking you. And this peace treaty, Allah says, وَتَكُونَ آيَةً لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. This is actually a sign of the Prophet's truth for the mu'mineen. They should consider this peace treaty to be an alamat that Rasulullah is really Rasul, and whatever he is doing according to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَهْدِيَكُمْ صِرَاطًا مُسْتَقِيمًا. And by this He wants to guide you. So these are all the benefits of Sulh Hudaybiyah that Allah is describing. Other spoils in future that you don't have power over them, but Allah has the ability, and He will bring them forth for you. Coming to this sentence, وَعَجَّلَ لَكُمْ هَذِهِ. And He has, however, He has expedited this one for you. This basically refers to Khaybar. And if you look at earlier, we talked about the group which was left behind, who did not come with the Prophet to Hudaybiyah for the Umrah. And later on when they came back, and Rasul said, we are going soon for another campaign where we are going to get Mal Ghanimat, they wanted to come with them. And Allah has said, no. This time, in the second campaign that you will have, only those who are with you in Hudaybiyah will go with you. And so those people were left behind. And that is actually the campaign of Khaybar. And this is what Allah mentions here by عَجَّلَ لَكُمْ هَذِهِ. When the Prophet had gone for Hudaybiyah, and then when he came back, he stayed in Medina only for about 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, he moved with those Muslims who were with him in Hudaybiyah towards Khaybar, which was in the northern part of Arabia. And this is the area where the Jewish people had come and settled. And there were already problems with them in Medina because of their betrayal of the treaty. And this is where we see that, especially when we look at the Khandaq event, there was another tribe which was actually expelled from Medina because of that. The Prophet had been very cordial with them. When he came initially after Hijrah, one of the first agreements he signed in Medina was with the Jewish minority, so that they can have peace and security and look for one another as citizens of the same city. But when they betrayed, Rasulullah didn't feel comfortable about it, that if we have enemy within the city, we can never be secure. But when they went to the northern parts of Arabia and settled down there, they still continued their support for the mushrikeen to conspire against the Muslims. So it became a problem for the Muslims, and Rasulullah wanted to deal with it. And this happens in the Muharram of 7th Hijrah. The Prophet went with the Muslims to the Khaybar area. There were many small forts where they were easily able to capture. But then they came to the one which is known as Qamus or Qumus, which was the strongest one, defended by the most courageous Jewish soldier of that time by the name of Marhab. Yes. Well, this is basically dealing with an ongoing problem. This is dealing with an ongoing problem that the Muslims had with the Jewish people. So they are initiating hostilities would not be allowed, but dealing with a problem which is there, because if you let it go, then you see it can even become more serious. The Prophet at that time became ill with severe headache, didn't even come out to meet the people from his tent for about 2 days. During that time, the Muslims tried, one day Abu Bakr went with the army to conquer the biggest of the forts, but he came back unsuccessful. Next day, Umar ibn Khattab went, and when the Prophet was told that there is this biggest of forts in Khaybar, which the Muslims have not been able to take over successfully, that's where he announces. He came out, and this is where he announces that tomorrow, لَأَعْطِيَنَّ الرَّأْيَ غَدًا رَجُلًا يُحِبُّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيُحِبُّهُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. That tomorrow I'm going to give the command, the flag or the command to a person who loves Allah and His Messenger, and whom Allah and His Messenger also love in return. قَرَّارًا غَيْرَ فَرَّارٍ, who is going to be firm in his fight. He will not retreat or flee. لا يرجع حتى يفتح الله على يديه. He will not return until Allah gives victory on through his hands. Allama Tabatabai and others actually go on to quote Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, and many Sunni historians that the Muslims were waiting to see who will be this person. So next morning, all of them gathered around the tent of the Prophet. He came out and, waiting to see whom he is appointing as the commander. And the Prophet looked around, and then he asked them, Aina Ali bin Abi Talib? Where is Ali? And they said that, well, he is not feeling well because he has an ailment in his eyes. So the Prophet says, فَأَرْسِلُوا إِلَيْهِ, send a messenger to him, ask him to come. So he comes back, he asks, what is the problem? And Ali said, I have, my eyes are hurting. And Rasulullah basically takes the saliva from his mouth and puts on the eyes of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And, this is one of the barakat of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And then Rasulullah basically gave him the flag and the command. He goes, and first, the person to deal with was Marhab. Marhab basically comes out and he says, the style they had of reciting Rajas, where he says, قَدْ عَلِمَتْ خَيْبَرَ أَنِّي مَرْحَبٌ, that the Khaybar knows my fame and my courage. They know that I am Marhab. So if you know me, just go back. And that is where Amir al-Mu'minin responds in his way by saying, أَنَا الَّذِي سَمَّتْنِ أُمُّ حَيْدَرَ, that I am the one whose mother has named me Haydara. And then he goes on to describe himself as one of the lions of the forest, that when people see, just they run away. And after dealing with the problem of Marhab, Ali continued the fight. And according to Abi Rafi', and this is all from the Sunni historians, he says, we had gone with Ali in that campaign, and after dealing with Marhab, others came, and there was a general attack. And while Ali was fighting with one of them, his shield was basically thrown away. And so فَتَنَاوَلَ عَلِيٌّ بَابَ الْحِسْنِ, Ali basically just, rooted out, took out the door of the fort, فَتَتْرَسَ بِهِ عَنْ نَفْسِهِ, and started using it as a shield for himself. And he says, فَلَمْ يَزِلْ فِي يَدِهِ وَهُوَ يُقَاتِلُ حَتَّى فَطَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ. And that door was still there. He's using that as his shield until he was able to gain access to the fort and final victory. ثُمَّ أَلْقَاهُ مِنْ يَدِهِ. And this Abu Rafi says, then he threw it on the ground. فَلَقَدْ رَأَيْتَنِي فِي نَفَرٍ مَعَ سَبْعَ أَنَا ثَامِنُهُمْ. He says, I myself saw that there were 7 people and I was the 8th of them. نجهد على أن نقلب ذلك الباب فما استطعنا أن نقلبه. 8 of us tried to just turn the door over, but we were not able to do that. According to another narration, إن عليا حمل الباب يوم خيبر حتى صعد المسلمين عليه. It's not only that Ali used that door as a shield. He actually, normally around the fort they dug a ditch so that the enemy would not be able to cross. And they have these gates opening up, which becomes like a bridge. Now this was not the bridge, this was the door itself. And the narration that we have here, again from Sunni sources, Ali used that door. He got down in the ditch and used the door to use as a bridge. حتى صعد المسلمين عليه فاقتحموه. And the Muslims started walking on it to cross over the ditch to go to the fort. فإنه حرك بعد ذلك فمن and then he moved it, and others, and according to this narration, there were 40 of them who tried to move it around, but they were not able to move it. One narration, which is probably not from the Sunni sources, the ditch was wider than the size of the door. So if this was the ditch, and this is the door, it was not good enough for the people to go on. So what Ali used to have to do, actually put it on one end, people get on it, and then he will move it to the other end, and they get off. Like the moving bridge or that they have. And the narration, I'm not sure whether Sunnis have this, but according to our narration, somebody looked at that, and they said to Rasulullah, look at Ali, look at the strength of his hand, the way he's carrying this door, using it as a bridge. And Rasulullah said, why don't you look at his feet? His feet is not touching the ground. He's walking on the air. Just as we hear about the mu'jiza of Isa ibn Maryam, he's walking on the water, for example. This was one of the signs of the blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. And it was after now when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala earlier, when he says, وَعَدَكُمْ مَغَانِمْ كَثِيرًا وَعَدَكُمُ اللَّهُ مَغَانِمْ كَثِيرًا تَأْخُذُونَهَا, that Allah has promised you abundant spoils that you are going to acquire. The main role which was played in this battle of Khaybar, which opened the door for the Maghanim, was Ali ibn Abi Talib. After this, strongest of the forts were conquered by the Muslims, others on their own, they agreed to come to terms with Rasulullah, including the issue of Fadak. It's all part of Khaybar, that area. And they were the one that said, because Rasulullah sat down with the people of Khaybar, and the agreement was that, you people are farming in this area. The agreement is that you do this, continue that, and whatever produce you have, half you can keep and half will go to the Muslims. And that was the same terms that the people of Fadak also asked from Rasulullah after the defeat of Marhab and his fort. So even Fadak, when we talk about this concept last year, we talked about it, that it came into the hands of the Muslims without bloodshed, without battle. That was actually a result of the hard work of Ali bin Abi Talib himself. And so that's also important to keep in mind, that Allah mentions this entire region as a maghanim kathira, abundant spoils that Allah had decided that this will go to the Muslims. The ayat which continues on 20 and 21, and then Allah basically mentioned, and we'll go through this part very quick. وَكَفَّ أَيْدِيَ النَّاسَ عَنْكُمْ, and He withheld the people's hands from you. This was another through Sulh Hudaybiyah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically prevented the mushrikeen to any more harm the Muslims. وَلِتَكُونَ آيَةً لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, so that this peace treaty itself becomes a sign for the mu'mineen, and whoever had doubts, this will become a sign for them. وَيَهْدِيَكُمْ صِرَاطًا مُسْتَقِيمًا, so that He can guide you to the right path. وَأُخْرَى لَمْ تَقْدِرُوا عَلَيْهَا, and then Allah says that the other spoils which we have not captured, قَدْ أَحَاطَ اللَّهُ بِهَا, Allah has knowledge about it, He has ability to get that for you. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. So this is more emphasizing the promise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to the Muslims, and especially to Rasulullah. The next ayat, 22, 23 and 24. وَلَوْ قَاتَلُكُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَوَلَّوُا الْأَدْبَارَ ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُونَ وَلِيًّا وَلَا نَصِيرًا. Let us look at that first, and then we'll come to the second sentence there. And if those who disbelieved had fought you, they would certainly turn their backs. They will retreat. Then they would not find any protector or a helper. Now, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, that, even those who question the wisdom of Prophet's decision, number one, he's going for Umrah without arms. Number two, the number of people is very few. He's going in the city of his most bitter enemy. So he's basically making a very unwise decision, and he's putting the life of himself and his followers in danger. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, as I said earlier, Allah really doesn't like anyone questioning the integrity of Rasulullah. He would go out of his way to emphasize this point. And this is as he says, that even if you had gone with light arms, only with your sword or dagger, and even if you were few in numbers, even if وَلَوْ قَاتَلَكُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, even if these mushrikeen of Mecca had fought against you, لَوَلَّوْا أَدْبَارًا, Allah says, even if that happened, they would have run away. I would have made sure that you will not be defeated or be harmed. ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُونَ وَلِيًّا وَلَا نَصِيرًا, and then those mushrikeen would have found no friend and no helper for themselves. سُنَّةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِ وَلَنْ تَجِدُ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. The second statement is very interesting. Sunnatullah, the sunnat of Allah, and I'll explain what does it mean. That the sunnat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been this from before. وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا, and you will never find change in Allah's sunnah. What does sunnah here mean? Means the way He deals with the nations. Means His course of action in how he deals with the community. The answer, the issue is that Allah is saying, I look at the people. If they are truthful, if they are steadfast, my nusrat and help will be there. If they are not truthful, if they are not steadfast, my help is not there. This is my sunnah. This is how I deal with the communities. And here Allah is saying to the Muslims that, if you behave in a way that I see you are true and you are also steadfast, my nusrat and help will be there with you. If you are not, I will not be there for you. And this is, Allah says, لَن تَجْدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You will not see any change in my attitude towards nations. And this is where we see the example of Badr, the first battle. The Muslims were outnumbered twice. The Mushrikeen came 900, Muslims were only about 300. The Muslims were ill-equipped, the Mushrikeen came fully equipped. Most of the Muslims were old people. Majority of Mushrikeen were young, able-bodied, fellows who had come for fighting. Even though the ratio was 900 and 300, in that first battle between Muslims and Mushrikeen of Mecca, the Muslims became victorious. And this is what Allah is saying. If you are steadfast, if you are true mu'mineen, my help will be there. In Khandaq also, the number was less, but they became victorious. Khaybar also, we see the same situation. The negative example is of Uhud. I'm sure you heard the example of Uhud, where the Muslims had positioned themselves in front of the mountain. But right at the back, there was a valley kind, area, where the enemy would have access to that to come from the back and attack them. And so Rasulullah from before had appointed 50 archmen under command of one of the companions, and they were given the instructions not to abandon their position, whether the Muslims on the ground are victorious or they are defeated. They should not leave their positions. And and what happened? In Uhud also, the Muslims initially were able to defeat the Mushrikeen. The Mushrikeen started running, leaving their things back. The Muslims on the ground started gathering mal ghanimat. These 50 archmen sitting on the hill, they said, well, if we don't go there, we'll not get our share. This greed came over. And their commander shouted to them that the Prophet has instructed us not to leave this position. But they didn't listen to him, and they just went down. That's where Khalid bin Walid, with his cavalry force, who had not joined the battle at the time, sees the opportunity, comes from behind and attacked the Muslims, a surprise attack, and the victory was taken away from them. This is what Allah is saying, سُنَّةُ اللَّهِ الَّتِي خَلَطْ مِنْ قَبْلِ وَلَنْ تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. Allah, will help you, provided there is truth and sabr and steadfastness among the Muslims. I think this even applies now. It's not an ayat which is dead. If you look at the example of Lebanon just few years ago, you have a group of mu'mineen, small in number, not very much armed as the state of Israel, but they stood their ground. And eventually, if you see, it became a positive result for them, especially when you look at the numbers and the equipments on both sides. And this is where, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very clear that if you have iman and sabr and steadfastness, Allah's victory will be with you. هو الذي كف أيديهم عنكم وأيديكم عنهم ببطن مكة من بعد أن أظفركم عليهم وكان الله بما تعملون بصيرا. Again, continuing this whole theme of Sulh Hudaybiyah, that this was actually a victory for you, and how Allah blessed the Muslims. Allah says He is the one who held back their hands from you and your hands from them. Means he prevented both groups from fighting by this peace treaty. And this is after he had given you victory over them. Means although Allah had said that if they attack you, I will be there to support you. Even then, Allah, basically wanted peace, and He considers that to be Fath Mubin, a clear victory for the Muslims. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرًا. And whatever you were doing, Allah was fully aware of it. So again, the emphasis is that this peace treaty is based on my will that the Prophet agreed to make with the mushrikeen. Just to emphasize the point that Allah prevented the mushrikeen from Muslims and Muslims from mushrikeen. The question would come, if mushrikeen were mushrik, they were the wrong party, why didn't Allah, let things happen and help Muslims to defeat them militarily? As if this question comes up, and this is what Allah responds to that it's not that the mushrikeen were good people, no. هُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Number one, their first sin is that they have disbelieved. Number two, وَصَدُّوكُمْ عَنِ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. And they prevented you from going to Masjid al-Haram for Umrah. And part of that was وَالْحَدْيَةِ. They didn't even only prevent you, they even prevented the Qurbani. Hadiyah is the sacrificial animal, the animal given for the offering. مَعْكُوفًا أَنْ يَبْلُغَ مَحِلُّهُ. These were the camels that the Muslims had brought with them, and they were all isolated, put in one place, and it was very obvious that these are Qurbani animals and not for the normal battle use and things like that. This is where I was asking the question. The Prophet had gone for Umrah. Where does Qurbani come in there? And even if you remember the story, when the peace treaty was concluded, Rasulullah took off his ihram and did Qurbani right in Hudaybiyah. And here it says that one of the things that the mushrikeen did was, number one, they did kufr. Number two, they prevented the Muslims from going to Masjid al-Haram. And number three, they prevented the animals, the sacrificial animal, from reaching to its destination, where it's going to be slaughtered. Not Mina, that is for Hajj. It is recommended when you go for Umrah to do Qurbani in Mecca itself. And so these camels were being brought along for Umrah and the Qurbani to be done in the city of Mecca itself. And that is why Allah says that they did not only prevent the Muslims from going to Mecca, but even the Qurbanis were prevented from going to the place where they were to be slaughtered. Now, why didn't Allah let things happen as He promised earlier? He said that if they had fought with you, they would have fled from the battleground because Allah would have helped the Muslims. Why didn't Allah do that? Why didn't He, wait for 2 more years for Fatih Makkah? Why didn't He allow the Muslims and Mushrikeen to fight there and, reach to the quick conclusion? This is the answer. وَلَوْلَا رِجَالٌ مُؤْمِنُونَ وَنِسَاءٌ مُؤْمِنَاتٌ لَمْ تَعْلَمُهُمْ أَنْ تَطْوُوهُمْ فَتُصِيبَكُمْ مِنْهُمْ مُعَرَّةٌ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Allah says that the reason why He didn't want any battle to happen at that time, especially in Mecca itself or close to Mecca, because there were men and believing women, lam ta'limuhum, that you Muslims, you don't even know about them. There were some Muslim men and women in Mecca who were mu'mineen, but they were in the state of taqiyya. Lam ta'limuhum means you didn't know about them because they were exercising taqiyya at that time. Their life would have been in danger, but in their heart they were mu'mineen. And since you didn't know, if there was a fight, you might have ended up harming them, trampling upon them. And then when you would have found out that they were Muslims, then you would have regretted the blame which would come on you without knowledge. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I didn't want hostilities to take place between the mushrikeen of Mecca and the Muslims who had gone to Hudaybiyah, because of some Muslim men and women who were still there in Taqiyya in Mecca itself. لَيَدْخِلَ اللَّهُ فِي رَحْمَتِهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. And then Allah says, this is our way of showing rahmah to whomever He wants. لَوْ تَزَيَّلُوا. Allah says, if they had been separated, if the Muslims were distinctly in one area and the mushrikeen had been in another area, لَعَذَّبْنَا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Allah says, we would have punished the mushrikeen. But we didn't want to punish while Muslims were still in the midst of them, especially those who were living as in taqiyya. And Allah says, I would have punished them adhaban alima. And so this is one example that when we talk about taqiyya, this is actually a very living example from the Qur'an, that even at the time of Sulh Hudaybiyah, there were some Muslims in Mecca who were not even known to the other Muslims. And that was the reason why that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't want any hostilities to take place between the two groups. Now let me go to something known as ta'wil and tanzil. This is what we discussed about this ayat number 25 was the tanzil. This is how the ayat has come, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to save the lives of the mu'mineen, men and women in Mecca whom you didn't know. If there would have been a fight and you didn't know them, you might have ended up harming them also, along with the mushrikeen. There's another tafsir about it, and it does not cancel the first one. That is the Zahiri tafsir. But we also believe that there is different levels of tafsir. One is batini, and that is the inner dimension of the tafsir of Qur'an. The tafsir which is there on a batini level says that it is not necessary just that there were some Muslim men and women in Mecca. It could also apply that there were some mushrikeen whose children or grandchildren would be Muslims. Allah didn't want to destroy them for the sake of their future believing generations, out of mercy for them. And this is where we see there's a hadith from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, where somebody asked him that we hear about the courage of Ali, the physical strength of Ali. How come in some of these cases he did not use his physical power to overcome the enemies? And the sixth Imam recited this ayat, لَوْلَا رِجَالُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَنِسَاءٌ مُؤْمِنَاتٍ. And Imam actually referred it to on a batini tafsir. He said, maybe in their line of descendants, they were mu'mineen and mu'minat. And that's why sometimes when we hear some of the khutbah, they say when there is a difference between Malik Ashtar using his sword in Siffin and killing whomever he finds from the other side, and Ali bin Abi Talib, he was very discriminative. The difference was Malik would just look at he's from Muawiyah's side, I just kill him. Whereas Ali is probably looking at the next generation, the generation after that. Maybe there is a mu'min in his sulb and his loins, and therefore Ali just lets him go. And so that is the ta'wil and the batini level of the tafsir of this ayat. They do not contradict, as I said it many times, tanzil and ta'wil go hand in hand. Tanzil is about the context in which the ayat was revealed and the apparent meaning of it, and ta'wil is the inner dimension of the tafsir of the ayat. Inshallah, we'll conclude here. We have about 15 minutes. We'll give 5 minutes for wuzu, so we can get ready for namaz at 8:30. Any questions? Nadi aliyan, well, the word nadi is call Ali, yes. The way we see the narrations from Sunnis where it says, فَقَالَ فَأَرْسِلُوا إِلَيْهِ, send somebody to him. You can change the words and says, nadi aliyan. The Prophet said, where is Ali? And the narration that we have about the statement, it is very common among the Shias. I was looking at its sanad. Allama Majlisi mentions it, but it doesn't really have a sanad as such. But the concept and the timing would be acceptable. So whether you say arsulu ilayhi, that the Prophet said, send somebody to him so he comes, or he says, nadi Ali and call Ali, it wouldn't really make a difference. Means we might have difficulty in proving that these words come, as far as the sanad is concerned, from the Prophet himself. But the content of that can be, the meaning of that, those words can be proven by the event. Probably the reason why he was not feeling well, as far as his eyes is concerned, to make people realize the difference between the status of Rasulullah and Ali. The whole world calls him Ya Ali Madad. Even when Rasul called him for help on that day, but still, just to make sure people don't mix up the hifz maratib, as we call it. Ali says, and I'm not, my eyes is hurting. And there, Ali, Rasulullah becomes mushkil kusha for Ali. So it's a dual role being played here. You see, he's coming to help Rasulullah. Now Rasulullah is helping Ali, so that people, sometimes get overboard in what they are saying. So maybe these were, in a way, done just to make sure people understand the realities. Yes, brother. The question is about what we discussed last week about the Battle of Hunain, where I said only 4 to 8 people stayed steadfast with the Prophet. Rest were all running away. And the names we have is mostly from Banu Hashim. The brothers forwarded a website of some of the Salafis, where they were saying even Shaykhain were part of that, people who were protecting the Prophet. We didn't see in the sources that we were looking at. I didn't get time to go back into it and check the references that he has mentioned. Inshallah, I'll get back to you in next week or the week after. But I'll just say one thing on that issue. Again, I would like to emphasize the point, as we said last week, we are not against the Sahaba. But we do not believe in this concept that all the Sahaba, just because they are Sahaba, they are okay. No, there were problems. We accept some of them. We do not accept some others. And we look at their own character and background and what they did. And that will be the criteria for us to accept or reject them. Sometimes they bring up this hadith which says, Ashabi kan nujum, that the Prophet says, my companions are like the stars. Just like the seamen, when they travel, for them stars become their line of finding the route and the direction. So then the hadith supposedly says, بِمَنْ اِقْتَدَيْتُمْ اِهْتَدَيْتُمْ, whoever you follow them, you are rightly guided. Now, this is actually concocted hadith. As I said, if we have to follow that hadith, what do we do in Jamal? Do we follow Ali or we follow Zubayr? Do we follow Abdullah bin Abbas or we follow Talha? Both of them are from the Sahaba. And so that example of Jamal shows that this hadith really doesn't make sense. This actually has been concocted because, Nujum, the stars are used by the seamen, those who travel in the ship. Because there is a hadith confirmed by Shias and Sunnis both, where the Prophet says, مَثَلُ أَهْلُ بَيْتِي كَمَثَلُ السَّفِينَةِ نُوحٍ. That the example of my Ahlul Bayt is like the example of the Ark of Nuh. So that's the ship. Now they're trying to put the Sahaba even up there. That the people going in that Safina of Ahlul Bayt, they still need the stars. This is how they play. They look at one hadith and then they have to counterbalance that, and that's where they come up with it. But they do not realize that those hadiths that they fabricate, logically we cannot really follow it. Because you look at Jamal, you look at Safin, there is no ihtadaytum. You cannot be rightly guided if you follow any one of them. You have to find who is right. Because when there is dispute between the Sahaba, either both of them are wrong, or one is wrong and one is right. Both of them logically cannot be right if they are on the opposite side. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the true guidance and keep us always among those who are the true followers of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and among those who are steadfast at the time of test and trial. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.